My name is Jacqueline Wilson, and today I celebrate my 33rd birthday. However, the day turned out to be not exactly what I imagined it to be. Instead of celebrating with my family, I found myself at a wedding ceremony surrounded by almost strangers. I came with my husband Alex, who is 3 years older than me, and he insisted on our presence here, not for my sake, but for the sake of those people whom he called friends. Although it would be an exaggeration to call them friends, I knew them only by sight, nothing more. In the hall of a luxurious hotel, with marble columns and chandeliers sparkling like crystal waterfalls, I felt like a complete stranger. As soon as we entered the hall, Alex immediately disappeared into the crowd, confidently shaking hands with acquaintances. His face was glowing, and I could see how he was communicating vividly, immersed in conversations, as if he had always been a part of this rich environment. I felt uncomfortable. It seemed that he was surrounded by strangers, and I, left alone, decided to find a toilet. Returning to the hall where the ceremony was to take place, I heard a rude, slightly harsh voice next to me. "Oh, look at this defective one. Why did they come here at all?" Those words hit me like hot coals, penetrating under my skin. I realized that it wasn't just gossip that was so easy to listen to. It was an outright, malicious insult. But none of them turned their words directly to me. They talked about me, but not to me. I tried not to pay attention to the unpleasant conversation and moved on, internally trying to calm down, but as soon as I moved, an irritated shout came from behind. "Hey, can you hear me?" I forced myself to ignore it, pretending I hadn't heard, but at that moment, quick footsteps caught up with me. My hand was suddenly in an iron grip, and I felt a sharp pain. "Wait a minute, I'm talking to you," a woman's voice was heard, loud and indignant. I spun around and met the gaze of a woman with an aggressive expression on her face. She held my hand tightly, as if I were some kind of suspect. The next second, I pulled my hand out of her grip, and she, as if for show, theatrically staggered back, as if she had been hurt. Another woman immediately appeared next to her, giving me a disapproving look and hugging her friend. "Catherine, are you okay?" "Why are you so rude?" she asked, to which she looked at me with an offended expression. "Who are you anyway?" I asked, annoyed and confused. The woman in front of me, whose name was Catherine, raised her eyebrows, looking at me with undisguised contempt. "Who am I? Do you really not remember me? What rudeness." Confused, I tried to remember something, but all I could see was her hostile expression. Finally, Catherine, with a malicious gleam in her eyes, said, "If you really forgot, I'm your sister, and this is our mother." She nodded at the woman who was still looking at me accusingly. The word sister brought back some vague, blurred memories in me. Maybe somewhere in my past there was someone named Catherine. But in the years since then, all that has been erased. "I'm not sure I understand what you're talking about," I replied, hoping that would end the conversation. My answer, however, only angered them even more, and I realized that this was not the end, but only the beginning of a strange and tense explanation. Meanwhile, 3 men were hurrying towards us, clearly alarmed by the noise coming from our side of the hall. They were dressed in expensive suits. One of them was walking ahead of the others, almost running, clearly worried about something. When they got closer, Catherine pointed at me with theatrical cruelty and screamed at the whole hall. "This suspicious person snuck into our wedding." Catherine dramatically pointed her finger at me, giving no one the opportunity to interfere. "Get her out of here right now." She added with such urgency that there was a note of true fear in her voice, as if I were not just a human being, but some dangerous intruder into their carefully constructed world. The 3 men who came up with Catherine reacted very differently. The first one she called Dad looked at me with wide eyes, and in his gaze I caught a mixture of confusion and indignation. The second, a young man named Noah, froze in mute horror. His face turned pale, and he didn't seem to know how to react. "Why is Jacqueline here on such a happy day?" he asked softly, and his voice trembled slightly, as if he was afraid to hear the answer. She must have sneaked in by mistake. It's unbearable." Another man exclaimed, his words sounding harsh, like a sentence. "Someone, call the guards." But Noah suddenly objected, raising his hand as if trying to stop the escalating situation. "Wait, look what you're talking about." He quickly added, and there was a barely perceptible note of sympathy in his voice, perhaps the only one that could still be addressed to me. But before his words could spread out in a circle, I muttered softly, "You really don't know anything." But, of course, no one heard me. It was at this moment that Alex appeared. His gaze, full of calm and confidence, cut through the tension hanging around like a knife. "Jacqueline, there you are. I've been looking for you," he said calmly and confidently, taking a step towards me. Everyone turned in his direction, and I, a barely perceptible smile flickered on my face, took a step towards him. "Sorry, on the way here I came across." I hesitated, not knowing how to describe the people who surrounded me. Alex frowned slightly, but took a quick look at the situation and seemed to instantly understand what was going on. Catherine's face changed when she saw me next to Alex. Her eyes flashed with anger, her lips tightened, as if she was holding back the words that were about to come out of her mouth. Next to her, her parents still looked confused, apparently not fully understanding exactly what had happened and why I was here. Noah, who seemed offended by his own family's behavior, spoke first. "Mr. Wilson, I'm sorry," he began with an awkward smile, turning to my husband. "My wife said something inappropriate." "I am very sorry both to you and to your wife." He turned to Catherine and gave her a disapproving look. "Catherine, you should apologize too," he added softly, and there was a reproach in his words. "Why should I apologize?" Catherine flushed, as if she had been insulted by the mere suggestion. She pointed sharply at me again. "She should be the one to apologize." This disrespectful man broke into our special day. "I do not know how she got here, but she is a disgrace to our family. We should have broken off our relationship with her a long time ago and never seen her again." The word family echoed in the air, spreading ominously over our heads. Noah looked stunned, looking from me to Catherine. Just at that moment, Catherine's parents intervened, and their voices pierced the silence that hung between us. "Oh, Noah, we're so sorry," Catherine's mother began, fixing me with a look in which I didn't notice a shadow of remorse. "We had one, the difficult eldest daughter. It's awkward even to talk about her." "We've been able to keep it a secret all this time," my father added, looking at me with distaste, as if I were an annoying reminder of something that should have been forgotten long ago. "We kicked her out of the house 10 years ago." "How did she even find out about Catherine's wedding? What does she want by coming here uninvited?" Instead of stopping, Catherine's mother continued, addressing Noah as if to justify herself to him. "Actually, Noah, she's not very smart, because she just graduated from high school and couldn't go to college after that. She just spent time working part-time and stayed at home, being a burden. She was like a parasite," she said bitterly. "She should be grateful that we supported her in high school." Those words pierced me like a dagger. It was as if those distant, painful years had returned, personified in their stinging remarks. Something inside me shrank painfully, but outwardly I remained calm, listening to these humiliating comments, as if they were addressed not to me, but to some faceless shadow. After all, what did it really mean to them? Catherine has been their favorite since childhood, and her existence has always set off mine. My family has always been like this. My father, a hereditary doctor, was proud of his practice, which he conducted directly from our house, where my mother worked as a nurse. To others, we probably looked like a happy family, full of prosperity and achievements. But in this house, under the guise of prosperity, there was a whole ocean of resentment and injustice. As an older sister, I grew up in the shadow of the younger Catherine, who was 7 years younger than me, and from childhood seemed to everyone the embodiment of attractiveness and prospects. I froze when I heard my father continue, glaring at Noah as if he were a strange stranger and not his daughter's fiancé. Wait, isn't this the same Noah, the son of the head of Wilson Hospital? His voice was filled with surprise, and for a moment there was a flicker of interest in it that I had never been awarded. It seems that the father has only now realized who was in front of him, and his attitude towards Noah has suddenly acquired a shade of awe. He turned to Catherine, as if sensing an opportunity he couldn't miss. "Catherine, dear," his voice softened, as if the very idea of an alliance with such an influential family suddenly eclipsed all the anger he felt towards me. But Catherine seemed to be blind to this change. She pointed at me again with an expression of obvious dislike. "Dad, you heard what she said. You don't think I have to put up with this, do you, especially on my special day, when I have someone next to me who doesn't understand how alien she is to us?" Her voice was as venomous as snake venom, and she stood in front of me, looking at me with disdain, as if I was unworthy to even touch the floor her new family was treading on. Noah seemed torn between his newfound wife and the logic he was apparently trying to maintain in the midst of this suddenly heated family conflict. "Catherine," his voice was soft, but full of hidden tension, as if he was desperately trying to reason with her, "you know that the guests—" But she cut him off without listening to the rest, glancing at me full of undisguised hatred. "She doesn't deserve to be here. Did you hear that, Noah? She's just a shadow, an old story that doesn't matter. We have chosen our family, and she is not a part of it." These words hurt, even though I had long ago learned to close myself off from their ridicule. After all, it was already something much more than just a casual insult. It was almost a public breakup, a furious statement that my family would prefer to cut me out of their existence. Memories came flooding back, fragments of conversations where my parents openly condemned me, convincing me that I, at a defect, did not deserve even a chance at independence and independence. It was as if I could hear their voices again, cold and full of mockery. "You are a defect by nature, Jacqueline, and you will never be able to be useful. You're not going to make it, so we're not going to spend money on you. We'll look at college for Catherine, but you won't give us anything." I secretly recorded these humiliating and cruel conversations. Listening to them at night, I tried to figure out what was wrong with me that made them push me away over and over again. How can you reject your own child just because he doesn't live up to expectations? But for them, I was just that, a black hole that they didn't want to put any effort into. And Catherine? She gladly followed their example, asserting her superiority and proclaiming that one day she would take our father's place, for the sake of our family. Even my parents, as if according to the script, supported her unconditionally. "Learn from her mistakes, Catherine, you are our pride." In the end, I refused to seek their approval, as I did when I was a child, refused to live in the expectation that someday they would notice me. After graduating from school, I decided to work and raise money, for independence, for a life that they were so obviously not going to provide for me. Then I stayed at my parents' house, although they called me a burden, holding me like a toy that is convenient to use when it is profitable. In the end, I secretly rented a tiny apartment that they didn't know about, and slowly collected my savings, preparing for the final breakup. For my parents, that moment when I left their house seemed to be a shock. I could see their faces contorting with indignation when they realized that I was an unworthy daughter, the one they had always considered insufficient, and really had not returned. Everyone froze as I continued to speak. There was silence in the room, which was not broken by a single sigh. When I saw how the faces of my parents had changed, now standing silently in front of me, I felt an echo of the freedom I had longed for. You know how things were. As soon as I crossed the threshold, a chain of humiliations began. I was not your daughter, I was something like a servant, or worse, an outsider to whom there was no sense of responsibility or affection. My clothes? The old things that you found in the trash or in the basements, as if I didn't deserve anything better. My books, school supplies? If they were, they became the subject of ridicule, and even you considered them a luxury. And as soon as there was an opportunity to do without something for me, you took advantage of it. This time, the mother didn't even try to object. She stood with a stony expression, her lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes betrayed everything: tension, confusion, and even, perhaps, a drop of fear. Her gaze was fixed on Alex, who was standing next to me, listening, immersed in my words. Of course, I continued, trying not to look into their eyes. It all went on until I had to live in a house full of poisonous jokes and eternal discontent. But no matter what I do, no matter who I am, you have never accepted me. You've always been busy with only one thing, Catherine. Her education, her clothes, her future, which you dreamed would lead her to a brilliant career. And when I was on the verge of independence, you tried with all your might to keep me from giving me the opportunity to leave. It was your way of controlling me, your way of reminding me that I am a defect and should never get a chance. Alex put his hand on my shoulder, as if he wanted to support me with this gesture. The lightness of his touch made it clear to me that I didn't need to be afraid of my words. His family was not like mine, and perhaps for the first time in many years I felt protected. I don't want to hear this, Catherine growled, her face hardening, and she looked at me with undisguised annoyance. Jacqueline, do you think that now that you have a doctor around, you can behave arrogantly? You have nothing to offer him, you haven't even graduated from college. You're still the same. She hesitated, searching for words, and grinned mockingly. Still the same loser. What a pity. Noah tried to gently pull her away, but she pushed his hand away and turned her gaze back to me. Catherine, please, Noah said softly, this is not the conversation we should be having right now. But Alex was looking at her with cold determination. His calmness seemed to balance her temper, and he finally decided to intervene. You know, Catherine, he said with barely perceptible reproach, Jacqueline really deserves more respect than you can possibly understand. When we talk about family, we mean caring and support, not just words. A real family won't do what you did to it. Your family did everything to destroy her dreams and opportunities, and despite this, she was still able to achieve more than you can imagine. Catherine flushed, her eyes glittered with anger, and she seemed ready to explode with anger. But my parents, who were standing next to me, suddenly changed. Their arrogance evaporated, leaving only confusion and embarrassment. They did not know what to answer. Perhaps for the first time in their lives they heard the truth about themselves expressed by a stranger. Do you think you can judge me? Her mother finally spoke, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. We did everything we could for her. She had shelter and food, and it was more than she deserved. Alex turned to me, shaking his head slightly, as if to show that it was not worth taking their words to heart. He knew that the truth was behind me, and his support became a safe haven for me, where I could hide from the violent storm that I had been going through all my life. Noah pursed his lips, casting a quick glance at Catherine, whose face was gradually losing its former confidence. Her arrogance and insolent words, flying around like fragile porcelain, turned into fragments, which she now tried in vain to grasp. My sister, who was always the center of attention, could not accept that her carefully constructed life seemed like a fragile facade compared to my difficult but honest achievement. Catherine, Noah said with grim firmness in his voice, that's not what you told me. I believed that I had an honest, purposeful person next to me. You claimed that you graduated from the best schools, that your life was full of efforts and achievements. You wanted me to believe in your superiority over your sister. He looked at me with a shadow of sympathy in his eyes, but I see that it was a deception. Catherine froze. Her face turned pale, and her eyes darted around, unable to find a foothold. My sister always knew how to manage people by directing their admiration at herself. But now, in front of Noah, her paintings, in which she painted herself as a role model, collapsed. I noticed how the parents tensed, as if wanting to object, but they knew that if they came out in her defense, their reputation would suffer. The silence that hung in the air was only a harbinger of a thunderstorm, and in the center of this thunderstorm was my sister, who for the first time turned out to be insecure and broken. Catherine, I said quietly but firmly, taking a step forward, You've always despised me for not living up to your expectations, and maybe even rejoiced at my failures. You wanted me to stay in the shadows, held back by doubts and fear. But you created this shadow yourself and ended up in it. You always thought you were better than me, smarter, more successful, but what did you really do? You dropped out of school, resorted to tricks to hide it, and eventually found someone who, in your opinion, could make you what you imagined yourself to be. Catherine clenched her fists, and her face twisted in impotent anger. She couldn't believe that I, the same sister she had once so confidently pushed into a corner, whom she had so easily ignored and called a loser, was now standing in front of her, calm and confident, revealing her flaws to the people she so wanted to impress. Noah, arms crossed over his chest, continued to look at her with cold disappointment, as if seeing her true face for the first time. He understood that he was facing a man who was ready to cheat for his own benefit, to hide his weakness behind bright words full of self-satisfaction. "Jacqueline, I owe you an apology," he finally said, turning to me with a warmth I never expected to hear from someone who used to be my sister's ally. "I've always looked at you through the lens of what Catherine told me. She said you were weak, lazy, incapable of doing anything really meaningful. But I see that I was deceived, that her words are just a haze hiding her own fears and doubts. My parents, being in the center of everyone's attention, tried to save face, but I saw their masks crack under the pressure of the truth. They were used to domination, to condemnation and manipulation, but now their past actions, full of injustice and cruelty, rose before them like an accusation. When I heard that my former parents had tried to break into the hospital where Alex worked, experiencing financial difficulties and hoping to meet me, I was overcome with conflicting feelings. The memories of how they treated me came alive like ghosts of the past, reminding me of every humiliated dream, every doubt they instilled, and every neglect that left scars in my soul. Now that fate had crossed our paths again, the furious, humiliated and desperate Catherine was no longer the woman I once knew. She became a stranger, a faded and sad shadow, desperately clinging to the remnants of the past. I walked down the hospital corridor, feeling as if the space around me seemed unreal, as if it wasn't me, but someone else was standing here now, watching as the parents who had once rejected me stood in front of Alex with an expression of hopeless pleading. I didn't let on that I noticed them as I passed by, and yet I felt their gazes. They seemed to be trying to see in me the old, broken girl that I once was. "Jacqueline, Jacqueline, please wait," her mother's voice sounded like a trembling plea, devoid of its former arrogance. Her words rushed through my ears like a whirlwind, taking me back to a distant time when she rarely even deigned to smile at me. Alex looked at me, raising an eyebrow questioningly. His eyes were full of sympathy and understanding, and I knew he would leave the choice up to me. Holding back a wave of emotions, I turned to my former parents, keeping a calm expression on my face, although everything was boiling inside. I didn't want to let their requests take me back to the past, where I was always just a shadow, a disenfranchised reflection of their expectations. "What do you need?" I asked in a flat tone that hid an icy determination. My mother, who was standing next to my father, held out her trembling hands to me. Her face reflected the full weight of the failures that I had seen on their faces only once, when they were younger and fighting for their cause. In her eyes there is a mixture of despair, shame and, perhaps, a glimmer of that love, which, it would seem, never existed. "Jacqueline, dear. We would like to ask your forgiveness," she said with difficulty. Each syllable sounded strained, as if she had to pull the words from the depths of her soul. My father was standing next to me, trying to hide his confusion behind a mask of cold dignity, but I saw something like vulnerability flash in his eyes, the same one that he never showed either to me or my sisters. "We made a lot of mistakes," he said dully, "but then we didn't understand. We see that we were mistaken. Everything did not go as we expected." "Did everything go wrong?" I allowed myself a small smile. "Maybe everything went as it should have. After all, you have never seen in me a person who deserves your support." The words that came out of me were calm, but they cut through the silence like a sharp blade, reflecting every blow they had dealt me in the past. The mother sobbed, covering her mouth with her hand, and the father closed his eyes, as if trying to come to terms with the words. "We came to you because..." His voice trailed off, and I realized that he sounded like he was talking to someone they still weren't used to trust, and it was true. I was just a way for them to solve their current problems, not a daughter they would like to return someday. "Because now you have problems? And you think that I am your salvation?" I gently shook my head, feeling an icy calmness strengthen inside me, protecting me from any desire to comfort, help, or forgive them. "All this time you knew where to find me. And not once did you try to do that when I really needed a family." My mother couldn't help herself any longer and burst into tears, falling to her knees, shrilly asking something inaudible, which may have been addressed to herself. The news of the closure of my parents' hospital caught up with me on the day when I seemed to finally find peace, removing an unnecessary burden of memories from my life. I read a concise message that came from an old friend from the past, and I felt a kind of, I won't say happiness, but relief, as if the heavy chains that this hospital has always wrapped around my past finally gave up and broke, opening the way for new, bright days. Deep down, I knew that the justice I had been missing had finally been done, leaving me alone with a peaceful sense of liberation. It took some time, and one day I found out about Catherine and Noah's divorce. It seemed to me that their life together was just a fragile illusion, built on mutual expectations and feigned support. After a series of troubles in which they were involved, this alliance began to collapse like a house of cards. Catherine, who was trying to beat me in the race of life, made the wrong choice more than once, each time making decisions that only distanced her from real happiness. Her affairs and fruitless attempts to stay in a world to which she, in fact, did not belong, failed her over and over again, leaving her in the end with a broken trough. And when, in desperation, she turned to our parents for help, hoping for their support, they reacted coldly, condemning her and refusing to deal with the shame that she, in their opinion, had brought on the family. There was not a drop of pity left in my heart when I found out that Catherine was faced with difficult circumstances and found herself in such a hopeless situation that she had to work in dubious places to survive. The years of her inner struggle, accumulated failures, and the stamp of helplessness have left traces visible to everyone who knew her. And I looked at it with a kind of indifference, as if every step she took was moving her further away from me, turning her into the stranger I once knew. Meanwhile, our former parents, on whom both Catherine and I once relied, had become only faded ghosts of their past. Close to retirement age, they struggled to find at least some use for their skills, but with a tarnished reputation, no hospital was ready to hire them. As doctors, they were now suffering from the consequences of their own mistakes, the very actions that had once destroyed not only my faith in them, but also led to such deplorable consequences. There was no glory or confidence in their lives anymore, only bitter memories of those days when they could be proud of themselves, but they destroyed everything they had achieved with their own hands. Meanwhile, peace reigned in my house, and I was happy to finally put the past behind me. My son, whose health I had been worried about for so long, was recovering, and after a long examination it became obvious that his condition had really improved. Every day I spent with him and Alex, my supportive and faithful companion, strengthened my desire to protect them from all those dark shadows that once terrified my childhood and youth.